Right, it's time now to cut the leg out to shape now by doing a cut with the jigsaw following the outer lines here and also this inner section here. Now you could do it freehand with the jigsaw, but I'm going to use the trammel which I got at the same time as the jigsaw, and I'm going to demonstrate to you, at least I hope I am, that using the trammel that is supplied with the jigsaw is pretty much the same as using the homemade trammel that we use with the writer. So they should be both as accurate as each other. So let's take a look, see how it goes. Let me just show you the setup here. I've got this same piece of wood that we were using before as a backing piece. I've got a pair of bench dogs in here and this piece of wood is up against it. I've put this clamp in to hold this piece of wood in place, although that's probably not really necessary. I'm using one of these fixed clamps from Vestal here at this end, which is actually screwed to the bench from underneath. And I've got my piece of wood with my markings, and this time I've had to drill some 4mm holes now, and those are immediately opposite the ones that I'd done for the other bit of jig work. So that's the only difference there. I've made sure that I've got space under here for the jigsaw blade, and I've got my trammel, and the first cut I'm going to do is this short one here, and that requires me to have a radius of 305mm, which will be like this, and my jigsaw is going to be attached at this end. You can always check that you've got the setup right by putting the pin in the trammel and then running it along the line where you're going to cut, and you'll see that that indent on the saw side, the saw's going here, will follow the required path perfectly. So we're good to go. It's dead easy. I've got the dust extractor connected, and all I've got to do is just make the attachment to the trammel, which I've done. I'm lifting it up slightly so I can get past that piece of wood, and I'm ready to go. I'm going to turn my dust extractor on. I'll start making my cut. And there's a perfect cut, absolutely spot on. And I'm now going to work my way around and do the rest of the cuts in a similar fashion. And we've got two of these now, just a little bit of tidying up with the sander. I'm using the Rotex 90 just to do these edges. They actually don't need a lot because that jigsaw leaves a pretty good edge. Now I want to add this bit of detail to the two legs. It's something that you'll see a lot in Gothic architecture, the 3-ring detail. And the way it's done is very simple. You take a Forstner bit, in my case it's a 35mm Forstner bit, and you create a pattern of 3 holes. They're symmetrical, and the 3 holes end up being about 3mm away from each other. After you've done that, you then use a bearing guided writer cutter to create this bit of detail. And then at the very end use a chisel to cut out the bit in the middle. Now the way you mark it out, make yourself a template like this, I've had mine for years, and position it where you want it to go, and then very carefully take your Forstner bit and introduce it through each hole and make a mark. For each of the 3 holes, make a mark, and then you know where you should be drilling. But to make life even easier, after you've made the mark, put a small drill hole into those positions, and that makes starting the Forstner cut much easier. There are my 3 holes there, almost touching, and we're ready for the next stage. And the easiest way now to cut this out is to first of all take most of it out by using your jigsaw. I've put a mark there, and here we go. And actually, that's the first time I've used my jigsaw to do this. That is so good, I don't need the chisel. Now, this is the underside of the seat of the bench. We're going to have a leg here and a leg there, and our bit of framing goes across and comes into contact here. This is our reference edge, by the way. Now, even though we've sanded it with the Rotex 150, because the wood was so warped, it's still not uniformly flat. So what we've got to do is somehow create a uniformly flat area for the two legs and the frame in the middle, so that we make a good joint between the two with no gaps. What I've done is, I put the piece of wood on the bench top, and I've then put a wedge. There's one under there, and there's one under here, to stop it wobbling. I then put these clamps on, and those clamps are just holding it still. If I release them now, the wood would not change shape in any way. It would just sit there because of those wedges. Now, I've made up this sliding jig, and it consists of two pieces of wood, one either side, which are just a fraction higher than this piece of seating. And on top is a piece of 3/4 inch MDF. And here we have two holes, and they're offset, and they're 30mm in diameter. And they're destined to have the writer with a 30mm guide bush go through there, and the writer will have a 16mm bit in it. And if I use each hole one at a time and then go up there, registering off this edge here, I will then take a skim off the surface, the undersurface here. When it comes to doing the two pieces for the legs, I will just use the guide bush, but this time referencing off this edge, and I will clamp the carriage in position so that I can do those cuts. Now, it's really important when you're doing a task like this to make sure you get the depth of cut right at the very beginning. And what one needs to look for is the lowest place of this wood, and you can see that by the biggest gap under the carriage. And when you find that lowest place, put the writer on there and then do a plunge so that the cutter is touching the surface at that lowest point, and then add 1 more millimetre. Right, I've put an end stop there to stop me going too far. It just happens that these clamps are in the right position to do the same at this end, and I'm now going to do my first cut. And I've got to remember to keep this edge against the reference edge here. That's the first bit done, that's that channel. That's the first cut done. I'll just move this over. Now, you can't expect your dust extraction to be as efficient when you're using a guide bush or a copying ring, and the reason is very simple. The dust is being created within this area here, and it just is not as efficient. So don't worry about a bit of extra dust. Well, that's it. Well, you can see now how that little channel has worked. It's sitting here quite nicely, but our next task is to shape this piece of wood. Right, we're about to draw out the detail on this bit of framing piece of wood, and I'm going to put one of these patterns in the middle here. So I've drawn that through here, and that allows me to work out where the lowest point of the cut should be. And I've put this piece of wood here. It's clamped in position, and that's going to allow me to bend this piece of oak into position, and that will bend uniformly to give me a nice line which I'll use for cutting. And it's quite simple to do this. I've got marks on the ends here, which I know where I want the cut to start, both there and there. And so I'll start at this end, and I'm going to put my clamp on with it on that line and with a piece of wood pointing up to there. And I'm going to go to this end, and I'm going to bend my piece of wood until it's in the right position there. But I've got to go back to this piece because you may be able to see it, I don't know, but there's a slight odd bit of a curve there. It's because when it was first put in, it was almost dead straight, and so it's now got to be told, right, you're a curved piece of wood now, not a straight piece. So that's pretty much there. I'm eyeballing it in case there's some sort of discontinuity in the piece of oak which causes it to bend unevenly, but I'm happy with that, so I can now draw my line. Right, I've marked everything out, and I'm now going to start my cutting. There we go. There's a little bit of weakness here because of some of the shapes and splits and so on. And so what I'm going to do is, I'm going to put a pair of very long screws in from the top, so you won't actually see them, and because it'll be under the bench here, just to reinforce this section here. And if ever you are in any doubt about whether you need to get yourself an impact driver, well, this is the sort of situation where one is very, very handy. Because it really does make putting screws in very, very easy. And so that's 2 screws in with no fuss whatsoever. Need to remember to do that on both sides. Well, I've just sort of pushed this together so you can just see what it's like before I start making the third video where we finish it off.